Well, Marco Vicenzino is the Director of Global Strategy Project, and he's with me now. Marco, welcome to the programme. Thanks for being with us. So we heard there in that sort that Russia is rethinking relations. I think that was the words they used with NATO and the EU. What does that mean? It
can mean anything ranging from revisiting the rules of engagement they've had with NATO and the EU since the collapse of the Soviet Union, or it also mean recreating an entire new paradigm with new parameters. And I think deliberately throughout this entire crisis, Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister, together with President Putin, have used very vague language deliberately to try to make people think more. And I say keeping a rhetoric that's very much ambiguous to left everyone hanging.
When we start to talk about new rules, people tend to get nervous, don't they? So what kind of new rules could we be envisaging?
The Russians would, from the Russian perspective, it would be whatever is necessary to preserve and secure Russian interests. And that in of itself, once again, is subject to varied interpretation. And it can be anything ranging from agreements on the energy sector regarding EU-Russia relationships, revisiting the NATO-EU Council, which was the NATO-Russia Council, which was signed in 2002, issues such as Afghanistan and the withdrawal from Afghanistan, de-escalation in Afghanistan. It can also mean counterterrorism issues. It's a multifaceted relationship between the EU and Russia and between NATO and Russia. Many overlapping issues, but there's also issues which are either, if not directly linked, also indirectly linked. It's also on the energy front, I would say, it's probably from the EU perspective, it's the energy issue that's most important. And regarding NATO, it's obviously security issues, and not just Ukraine. You're looking at the issue of Georgia, that was under crisis in 2008, and other states from the former Soviet Union who have sizable Russian minorities, which fear now, after all the precedent has been set in 2008 and the current crisis.
So when we talk about that, do we mean that when Russia says it wants to protect its interests, what it means are even those that lie outside of Russia itself?
When it says its interests, I mean not just their economic, political, or diplomatic interests, also in terms of Russian-speaking minorities, which many of them consider to be, in a way, although they're not technically their citizens, but as part of the Russian nation. It's important to think from Putin's perspective, he's not just a nationalist. One can even call him a civilizationist, meaning that he doesn't see Russia in terms just as a nation. He sees Russia in terms as a civilization, which has, and particularly its Russian-speaking peoples, are an essential part of that. Remember, he said one of the greatest catastrophes of the 20th century was the collapse of the Soviet Union. Much of that is tied into his mindset. It's important to understand his mindset, and many times when he speaks, you have to read between the lines, very much so.
Marco, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thanks.